10 US states that could break away and join Canada. Is it really possible? Predictions for 2025. The United States and Canada have long stood side by side, two powerful nations sharing the world's longest peaceful border. But in a world shifting faster than ever, what if that border wasn't so fixed after all? What if, in 2025, certain US states saw a different future, one that pointed north? It might sound far-fetched, but when you consider the growing divide in American politics, the rise of regional identities, and how many states already feel more connected to Canada in culture, economy, and values, the idea suddenly doesn't seem so strange. Imagine, what if Washington State, already intertwined with British Columbia, made the leap? What if New Hampshire, with its independent spirit, decided its future lies elsewhere? And Alaska, already separated by thousands of miles, could it find a new kind of belonging? Some of these possibilities may seem outrageous. Others, the signs are already in front of us. This is the journey of wisdom, and today we're exploring not just geography, but identity, possibility, and the quiet transformations happening beneath the surface. Let's dive in. Number 1. Michigan. Michigan. A state that might surprise many as the first on the list of places that could, in theory, break away and blend into the fabric of Canada. When we take a closer look, the depth of its connection to Canada is undeniable, almost as if it's a limb of the Canadian body rather than a separate American state. With more than $80 billion in goods exchanged annually, Michigan's economy is tethered to its northern neighbor more tightly than any other U.S. state. The Detroit-Windsor corridor hums like a heartbeat between the two nations. Thousands of trucks crossing back and forth daily in a rhythm so constant it resembles the lifeblood of both regions. As the Buddha once said, to understand everything is to forgive everything. And when we begin to understand the depth of this interdependence, we begin to see how borders become less about separation and more about connection. This economic intimacy goes far beyond simple trade. It's a shared system. The auto industry, Michigan's pride and powerhouse, is deeply enmeshed with Canada's. Manufacturing plants on either side of the border collaborate so closely that one vehicle might have its engine crafted in Windsor, its frame shaped in Detroit, and be completed by hands trained in both countries. If you've driven a Ford, a Chevy, or a Chrysler lately, you've already participated in this quiet partnership, and should this border be abruptly closed, Michigan's economy could tumble into a deep freeze, not metaphorically, but quite literally, as it also draws electricity from Canadian grids. The infrastructure, power lines, tunnels, even the iconic Ambassador Bridge, speaks to shared survival, not just shared profits. That bridge, by the way, is privately owned by a Canadian billionaire, a detail that hints at how Canadian hands already hold the keys to significant parts of Michigan's logistical backbone. But this connection isn't a modern invention, it's rooted in history. In the aftermath of the Toledo War during the 1800s, a conflict largely forgotten by most, there were voices in Michigan that openly considered joining Canada instead of remaining under the US flag. It didn't happen, but that sentiment of cultural and economic closeness with Canada didn't vanish with the ink on a treaty. In today's world, where global borders feel more porous due to trade, technology, and shifting ideologies, such a concept doesn't seem as far-fetched as it once might have. The Buddhist teacher Thich Nhat Hanh once said, "We are here to awaken from the illusion of our separateness." Michigan and Canada in trade, infrastructure, and in many ways of life, have already done just that. In modern life, where our jobs, our cars, even our power supply depends on cross-border cooperation, perhaps the idea of national boundaries deserves more flexibility than rigidity. And maybe, just maybe, for people in places like Michigan, the idea of aligning with what already feels like a natural partner isn't about breaking away, but finally acknowledging a relationship that's long been lived but never labeled. As we consider this, we're not just entertaining wild theories. We're reflecting on how deeply interconnected our modern societies have become, and how perhaps it's not about which flag flies above us, but how well we live with those across it. Number 2, Alaska. Let's take a journey north, way north, to Alaska, a state so unique, so geographically distant, and so self-reliant that it already feels like its own country. You see, when we think about the United States, most of us picture a connected landmass, but Alaska? It's a world apart. Separated from the mainland by thousands of miles and sitting right above Canada, it raises a fascinating question. How American can a state truly feel when you have to drive through another country just to reach it? This isn't just a fun trivia fact. It speaks to something deeper about Alaska's identity, one that's shaped more by its neighbors and environment than by what's happening in Washington, D.C. Have you ever wondered what really makes a place feel like it belongs to a nation? Is it laws, culture, economics, or maybe something more subtle, like connection and shared purpose? Alaska challenges us to rethink that. From its economy to its military ties, so much of Alaska's daily reality is interwoven with Canada. Billions of dollars in trade flow between them: oil, seafood, minerals, and natural resources that fuel both nations' economies. Major Canadian companies have their hands in Alaskan soil, quite literally, and many of Alaska's fishermen rely on Canadian waters to make their living. When people work, eat, and trade across borders every day, those lines on the map start to blur. And then there's the history, something we often overlook. Alaska wasn't even part of the US until 1867, when it was purchased from Russia. That fact alone reminds us what feels permanent today hasn't always been, and might not always be tomorrow. So if Alaska once belonged to Russia, is it really so hard to imagine it choosing a new direction in the future if circumstances changed? That's not just speculation, it's a reflection on how adaptable borders and allegiances can be when shaped by geography, economics, and identity. Now let's look at defense. Alaska is home to some of America's most critical military bases, protecting the northern skies. But here's something few people talk about. Canada is already deeply involved in those efforts. Through NORAD, the US and Canada work side by side to monitor and protect North American airspace, and Alaska is right in the middle of that partnership. If global tensions ever shifted, would it really be so strange for Alaska and Canada to deepen their alliance further, even politically? So what does this all mean for you, the listener? It's a reminder that even things that seem solid, like borders and national identity, are constantly shaped by deeper forces, connection, cooperation, and shared values. In our own lives, aren't we often faced with similar moments, times when we're geographically part of one thing, but emotionally or practically tied to something else? Whether it's where we live, who we work with, or what we believe, the question we might ask is, what truly defines where we belong? The Buddha once said, "Nothing is forever except change." Alaska teaches us that even in places that seem frozen in place, the future can hold unexpected shifts. And maybe the lesson is this: when we stay open to change, when we recognize the relationships that sustain us, we begin to see that home isn't just a flag. It's the people we trust, the systems we rely on, and the bonds we build. So, what do you think? If Alaska already lives like an independent nation, is making it official really so far-fetched? Number 3, Oregon. Let me take you to Oregon, not just the land of misty forests and craft coffee, but a state where something deeper is stirring beneath the surface, something that's making more and more people wonder, what if we just don't fit in here anymore? You see, Oregon isn't just facing political disagreements or cultural divides, it's starting to question its alignment with the country it's a part of. And that's not as far-fetched as it sounds. When you look closely, Oregon has more in common with Canada than with many of its American counterparts. And that's not just an observation. It's a growing sentiment on the ground. Economically speaking, Oregon moves over $4 billion in goods with Canada every year. That's not small change, but trade is just the surface. Where things really start to shift is in values, in how people live, what they believe in, and the kind of future they want to build. Oregon's environmental policies, views on universal healthcare and labor protections look strikingly similar to those in British Columbia. So the question becomes, when your values and way of life align more with another country than your own, what does that say about your identity? Now, you might have heard about the Greater Idaho movement, rural eastern counties in Oregon pushing to join Idaho in search of more conservative governance. But flip the coin and you'll find some Oregonians looking in the opposite direction entirely, north toward Canada. Especially in western Oregon, where cities like Portland feel increasingly out of sync with US federal decisions, there's a quiet but growing question: would we be better off in a system that reflects who we already are? While this idea remains speculative, it raises deeper questions about identity and governance, especially when communities feel culturally or ideologically distant from centralized systems. The Buddha once said, "Just as a candle cannot burn without fire, men cannot live without a spiritual life." For many in Oregon, that spiritual life is rooted in cooperation, compassion, and sustainability, values they see echoed more clearly in the Canadian model. Let's also talk about connection, not in a metaphorical sense, but in real lived experience. Portland and Vancouver, BC, could easily be sister cities. They share not just similar skylines, but a shared rhythm of life, eco-conscious living, progressive culture, and a deep love for the outdoors. It's hard to say that about Oregon and, say, Texas or Florida. So when crisis comes, whether it's political unrest, climate disaster, or economic instability, where will people naturally turn for stability and belonging? Sometimes the answer lies not in revolution, but in realignment. And perhaps that's what's brewing quietly in Oregon's heart. Not a desire to cause disruption, but a yearning to find a home that matches its soul. So here's something to think about, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. What truly defines where we belong? Is it where we were born, or is it where our values feel safe and respected? In the end, this isn't just about Oregon or borders. It's about people. People who want to live in alignment with their principles, who want their communities to thrive in ways that make sense to them. And maybe that's the bigger lesson here, that we all deserve to live somewhere that feels like home, not just on the map, but in the heart. As we reflect on that, let us remember, peace comes from within, do not seek it without. What if Oregon is simply searching for the peace it already feels, just in a different direction. If you've watched up to this point, you're clearly curious about the future of the US and Canada, and what might really happen in 2025. Drop a comment below with border shift to show your thinking beyond the headlines. Don't go anywhere. There's still more fascinating predictions and surprising insights coming up. Stay until the end to see which states could actually make the leap north. Number 4. Washington. Washington State, nestled in the Pacific Northwest, may be part of the United States on paper, but when you take a closer look, not just at the map, but at the way people live, trade, and think, you begin to realize something deeper is at play. This state feels more connected to Canada than to much of the rest of America. And that feeling isn't just a casual observation, it's rooted in numbers, policy, culture, and geography. Let's begin with the economic thread that ties Washington to its northern neighbor. In 2023 alone, trade between Washington and Canada surpassed $20 billion. That's not just a few contracts here and there. That's a foundational part of Washington. From lumber to aircraft components, from software to agriculture, Canadian markets are key to the state's prosperity, but trade is only one part of the bond. Washington's access to clean, renewable energy is heavily supported by Canadian hydroelectric power, flowing south from British Columbia and helping to power the lights in homes and the innovation in tech hubs like Seattle. Even the state's ports, particularly Seattle's, operate in tandem with Canadian shipping routes, connecting Asia to North America in ways that make Vancouver and Seattle feel more like sister cities than competitors. This leads us to another fascinating connection: politics. Washington is known for its progressive stance on healthcare, climate action, and social equity, all values that mirror Canadian policies more than they do the federal trends in Washington, D.C. It's no surprise then that leaders in both Washington State and British Columbia have discussed deeper ties, including a proposed high-speed rail that could connect Seattle to Vancouver in under 2 hours. Think about what that means, physically bridging two regions that are already aligned in spirit. Some politicians have even floated the possibility of greater economic integration between the two, which makes you wonder, if two places already live and think alike, is it really so wild to consider a future where they operate under the same flag? The Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh once said, "We are here to awaken from the illusion of our separateness." That feels deeply relevant here, where political borders may not fully reflect the lived reality of the people on either side. And culturally? The overlap is undeniable. The people of Vancouver and Seattle share not only a physical climate but a mindset, eco-consciousness, a booming tech industry, a love for outdoor adventures, and of course a deep affection for good coffee and independent thinking. Many British Columbians already live and work in Washington, and vice versa, creating a seamless cultural exchange that transcends national identity. So in a world where political divisions in the US are growing deeper and more complex, one might ask, if Washington ever found itself at odds with the federal system, where would it look for stability and belonging? Perhaps not to the east, but to the north. And maybe that question extends beyond just Washington. In our own lives, don't we all seek alignment? In values, in relationships, in community? When things no longer feel right, when the systems we live within no longer support who we are, it's natural to consider alternatives. Not out of rebellion, but out of the quiet, courageous pursuit of what feels true. So here's something worth reflecting on. What truly makes a place home? Its borders or its values? And if two places share the same heartbeat, is it really so unmanageable for them to one day walk together as one. Number 5. Montana. Let's talk about Montana. A state that may be proudly American, yet when you look closely, you'll see it has far more in common with its Canadian neighbors than you might expect. With a long 545-mile stretch of shared border with Alberta, Saskatchewan, and British Columbia, Montana doesn't just sit next to Canada. It's connected to it in spirit, economy, and culture. This connection runs deep, and it's not just about geography. In 2023 alone, Montana exported over $700 million worth of goods to Canada, making our northern neighbor one of the state's top trade partners. From agricultural products to minerals and manufactured goods, the flow of commerce between the two regions reflects a natural economic alignment. And when you walk through a small Montana town or spend a winter with the locals, it quickly becomes clear that the people here live much like Canadians, grounded in nature, shaped by rugged terrain, and held together by communities that value self-reliance and simplicity. Whether it's ranching under wide open skies, braving long snowbound months, or enjoying the peaceful silence of mountain forests, Montanans and Canadians live parallel lives in different nations. Have you ever felt like you belonged somewhere else? Not because you didn't love your home, but because your values, your way of life, just made more sense somewhere else. There's also a historical layer to all this. Back in the 1800s, before Montana officially joined the United States, much of its economy was driven by the fur trade. And guess who dominated that trade? Canadian companies. That early economic bond helped shape the region's development, and the connections never fully faded. Even today, some Montanans hold dual citizenship, and many have close family across the border. It's common to hear folks joking that Alberta and Montana are basically the same, only Alberta has universal health care. But beneath the humor lies a more serious thought. What if they're not so different after all? That brings us to something deeper and more personal, the feeling among many Montanans that Washington, D.C. just doesn't understand them. There's a strong, often unspoken sentiment of independence in this state, a belief that decisions made thousands of miles away often don't reflect the values and needs of the people living here, and when a population feels unheard or overlooked, it starts to ask real questions. What kind of system actually reflects who we are? Who listens to us, supports our industries, respects our way of life? It's not about rebellion, it's about belonging. As the Buddha once said, you yourself must strive. The Buddhas only point the way. And maybe for Montana, the direction to look isn't just east toward Washington, but also north, where neighbors already share so much of the same soul. So I'll ask you, what defines a place more? The lines on a map or the spirit of the people? In today's world, where communities are rediscovering their identities and questioning long-standing systems, Montana's situation isn't just a curiosity, it's a reminder that where you feel seen, heard, and aligned, that's where you begin to feel at home. The lesson here? Stay true to your roots, but don't be afraid to ask if those roots might grow stronger in different soil. Number 6. Vermont. Let's talk about Vermont, a place that might seem small on the map, but when you dive into its character, history, and way of life, you start to see something much bigger brewing beneath the surface. You know Vermont for its breathtaking fall colors, its peaceful maple forests, and its charming small towns. But there's more to this state than just postcard beauty. Vermont has always had a spirit of independence. In fact, before it joined the United States in 1791, it was its own republic. That's right, it functioned as an independent country for 14 years, with its own currency, government, and vision for self-rule. That same energy still runs deep today. Politically, Vermont is among the most progressive states in the country, with policies on healthcare, environmental sustainability, and education that often mirror those of Canada more than its American counterparts. So here's a question for you. When a community's values and policies start aligning more closely with a neighboring country than its own, how long before people start wondering where they truly belong? Some Vermonters have already asked that out loud. There's an actual movement called the Second Vermont Republic, quietly pushing for secession. Not with anger, but with a deep belief that the state might thrive more independently, or perhaps even alongside a country like Canada that shares many of its ideals. Now, let's go a little deeper into those connections. Vermont doesn't just look like parts of Quebec, it works with them too. The state maintains strong trade ties with its Canadian neighbour, especially when it comes to energy, agriculture and tourism. You might be surprised to know how many Vermont industries are integrated with Canada's economy, from renewable energy to farming practices that prioritize environmental care over mass production. There's a shared commitment to protecting nature, supporting local economies, and ensuring access to essential services for everyone, not just the wealthy. That kind of alignment isn't just coincidental, it speaks to a deeper sense of shared purpose between Vermont and Canada. As the Buddha once said, just as a flower does not pick and choose the bees that come to it, a wise person lives without picking and choosing. Vermont, in its quiet wisdom, seems to be reaching naturally toward what it resonates with, a neighbor that mirrors its values in meaningful ways. And when you consider the rising divisions and political tension across the US, you have to ask, what happens when a place starts to feel more foreign in its own country than in the one just across the border? This isn't about rebellion or dissatisfaction, it's about identity. In today's complex world, people are waking up to how much their local values matter, how much their community shapes their happiness, and how important it is to feel heard. Maybe that's why some Vermonters are starting to look north, with more than curiosity. The idea of Vermont breaking away might sound extreme at first, but when you understand the roots of its culture, economy, and history, it starts to sound more like a return to form than a radical leap. And perhaps that's the real lesson here, that home isn't always about where you've been placed, but where your values are protected, where your voice matters, and where your future feels most at peace. So let me ask you, what defines your sense of belonging, your address, or your alignment with the world around you? Because in the case of Vermont, the quiet path north may not be about leaving something behind, but about moving closer to what it's always quietly believed in. Still watching? Then you're exactly the kind of curious mind this video was made for. Type state swap in the comments to join others who are thinking beyond borders. Keep watching, because what we reveal next just might change how you see the US-Canada relationship forever. Number 7. Maine. It might surprise many to learn that this quiet northeastern state is already deeply intertwined with Canada in ways that go beyond geography. Maine relies heavily on Quebec for its electricity, importing a significant portion of its power supply from the province just across the border, meaning, quite literally, that Canada helps keep the lights on in this part of the United States. This isn't just a matter of infrastructure, it's about interdependence. Over $3 billion worth of goods travel between Maine and Canada every year, shaping a local economy that feels less like an extension of the US mainland and more like a natural partner to its northern neighbor. As the world becomes more interconnected, economic reliance like this sparks broader conversations about identity, belonging, and future possibilities. The Dalai Lama once said, "Interdependence is a fundamental law of nature." And in the case of Maine, this truth plays out across power lines, highways, and fishing docks. Culturally, Maine feels distinctly different from other US states. Its rugged coastline, quiet fishing villages, and deeply rooted Franco-American communities evoke a sense of shared heritage with places like New Brunswick, more than with distant states like Texas or Arizona. French is still spoken in many parts of the state, and the sense of community is grounded in values that align closely with Canadian sensibilities: sustainability, cooperation, and a deep respect for nature. These shared characteristics have slowly blurred the imaginary lines that separate national borders, creating an emotional and cultural closeness that no map can fully illustrate. As we navigate a world where identity is shaped as much by culture and values as by legal borders, Maine stands out as a place that feels like it already has one foot across. Politically, Maine often finds itself more aligned with Canada's progressive stances than with the polarizing climate in Washington. From healthcare to environmental policies, Mainers have a history of favoring community-based solutions over corporate-driven agendas. This philosophical closeness to Canadian values reinforces the idea that Maine could, in theory, find compatibility with a different national framework, not necessarily through secession, but perhaps through deeper regional integration. The Buddhist teaching, "Nothing is permanent, everything is subject to change," reminds us that political landscapes evolve, and where there is alignment of purpose and mutual benefit, new possibilities arise. In today's world, such shifts are no longer unthinkable. They're part of the broader pattern of change we're all witnessing. Historically, Maine has already proven that separation is not impossible. It was once part of Massachusetts, only becoming a state of its own in 1820 as part of the Missouri Compromise. This historical precedent shows that Maine has navigated change before, peacefully and purposefully. While breaking away from the United States to join another country may seem radical to some, it's worth noting that the people of Maine value what works, and when it comes to sustainability, trade, and community values, their current relationship with Canada already provides many of the benefits of a close alliance. This doesn't mean a political shift is imminent, but it highlights how regions can evolve in ways that prioritize the well-being of their people. As Thich Nhat Hanh once said, "The way out is in." Perhaps the path forward for Maine lies not in drawing hard lines, but in continuing to follow the natural flow of connection, cooperation, and shared vision. In a world driven by change, those who thrive are not the most rigid, but the most adaptable. And Maine, quietly yet consistently, is showing us how that adaptability can shape not just a future, but a legacy. Number 8. New Hampshire. Let's talk about New Hampshire, a state that doesn't just talk about freedom, but lives and breathes it. You've probably heard the phrase, "live free or die." It's not just printed on their license plates, it's woven into their identity. Now ask yourself, what happens when a state built on independence starts to question the very union it belongs to? New Hampshire has always been something of a rebel within the American landscape. No income tax, no sales tax, a deep-rooted belief that government should be as small and local as possible. If there were ever a state that might seriously consider stepping away from the US, it's this one. And here's the thing, it's not just hypothetical. Back in 2022, lawmakers in New Hampshire actually proposed a constitutional amendment that would have put secession on the ballot. Think about that for a second. An actual, serious debate in a state legislature about leaving the United States. Sure, it didn't pass, but the fact that it was even discussed speaks volumes about the growing divide between states like New Hampshire and the federal government. You might be wondering, why would they even consider joining Canada? Well, the connection isn't as far-fetched as it sounds. Economically, New Hampshire is already tightly linked with Canada. Over $8 billion in trade moves between them each year. For a small state, that's a big deal. Many local businesses in industries like forestry, manufacturing, and energy already rely on Canadian markets. And culturally, there's a lot that aligns. New Hampshire's love for the outdoors, its winter sports culture, and even its regional pride share more in common with Quebec and the Canadian Maritimes than with, say, southern states like Florida or Texas. So ask yourself, could a future where New Hampshire trades Washington for Ottawa really be that unbelievable? And then there's the Free State Project. This isn't just a quirky political experiment. It's a growing movement of thousands of libertarian-minded Americans who've relocated to New Hampshire with one goal: shrink government and increase personal liberty. They've already had success getting elected to local offices, introducing bills, and shifting policy discussions. Though entirely hypothetical, it prompts reflection on how far movements rooted in local values might imagine their role in shaping political discourse. What if these residents believe that the only way to truly live free is to walk away from a federal system they no longer trust? Could the same pioneering spirit that built this country now be the one that fractures it? This kind of question opens the door for deeper thinking. Is loyalty to a nation unconditional, or is it something that can fade when values drift apart? Can economic ties, cultural similarities, and political philosophy be stronger than national identity? And if so, what happens next? The truth is, New Hampshire isn't declaring independence tomorrow, but its story raises powerful questions about how people define freedom, loyalty, and belonging. It reminds us that the idea of a nation is only as strong as the shared values holding it together, and when those values begin to split, even the smallest states can start to shake the foundations. So here's the deeper lesson. Freedom isn't just a word. It's a choice people are willing to make, even if it means rewriting the future. What would you choose if the world you knew no longer reflected the values you hold most dear? Number 9. Minnesota. Let's take a closer look at Minnesota, a state that might surprise you with just how closely it's tied to Canada, so much so that the idea of it one day breaking away from the US to join its northern neighbor doesn't seem entirely out of reach. Now, you might think this sounds far-fetched, but let's break it down together and see why some people, maybe even folks living there, are starting to wonder, what if? Minnesota hugs a massive 550-mile border with Canada, and that's not just a geographic detail, it's a lifeline. In 2023 alone, Minnesota exported over $7 billion in goods to Canada, making it not just a major trading partner, but the biggest one. That's a powerful connection, and it's more than numbers on a spreadsheet. It's businesses, families, and communities depending on cross-border ties to thrive. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Culturally, politically, and socially, Minnesota often feels more in sync with Canada than with some parts of the US. From their famously friendly people to their shared passion for hockey, snow-covered winters, and progressive policies, it's no wonder that Minnesotans sometimes get mistaken for Canadians, accent and all. Think about this. how different are they really? The people of Minnesota value social support systems, accessible health care, and environmental protection, issues that often align more closely with Canadian priorities than federal US policy. It's not just policy either. There's a shared identity here, a kind of northern resilience shaped by freezing winters, deep forests, and a love for nature that runs through both sides of the border. Even historically, Minnesota has deep roots that stretch into... Before it officially became a US state in 1858, parts of the land were influenced by British governance, and the fur trade that once dominated the region was deeply connected to Canadian commerce. Many Minnesotans today have dual citizenship or close family ties in Canada, making the idea of joining their northern neighbor less of a leap and more of a realignment. Now you might be wondering, could this actually happen? That's a fair question. Let's not pretend that secession is simple. It's not. But some experts suggest that if the US were to go through a major crisis, political chaos, economic collapse, deep social unrest, states like Minnesota, which already have strong alternative alliances and shared values elsewhere, might begin to reassess their place in the Union. Would they stay out of loyalty? Or would they choose a future that feels more aligned with their daily reality and long-term vision? In Buddhist thought, there's a powerful teaching that says, all conditioned things are impermanent. When one sees this with wisdom, one turns away from suffering. This doesn't suggest any real movement toward secession, but invites a broader look at how regional values can inform public discourse in times of national tension. So maybe the question isn't whether Minnesota should break away, but rather, what truly serves the well-being of its people? What if we looked at political boundaries not as permanent lines, but as agreements made to serve harmony and human flourishing? As someone who believes in understanding beyond division, I think this topic challenges us to consider what makes a community feel at home, not just in geography, but in values. If you lived in a place that no longer reflected who you are, would you seek change? Or would you stay and try to transform it from within? Minnesota might not secede tomorrow, but the conversation around its future opens a door to deeper reflection about identity, belonging, and the possibility of peaceful change. So, I'll leave you with this question. What defines your home? The land you stand on, or the values you stand for? Number 10. North Dakota. Let's talk about North Dakota, a state that often flies under the radar, but when you really take a closer look, it's a place with deep, practical ties to a foreign country. So much so that it raises a bold and thought-provoking question. Could it one day align itself more formally with Canada? At first glance, that sounds like a stretch, but the numbers and lifestyle suggest otherwise. North Dakota may be small in population and tucked away in the northern heartland, but its economic pulse beats in sync with Canada. It exports over $6 billion, 0 cents, in goods to Canada every year, more than to any other nation. That's not just trade, that's dependency. And beyond just goods, it's also about how life flows across the border. Canadian companies supply a large portion of North Dakota's energy, keeping lights on and homes warm through long winters. In agriculture, a cornerstone of the state's economy, many local farmers rely heavily on Canadian buyers to stay profitable. And in real, everyday life, North Dakotans regularly cross the border for healthcare that's often cheaper and more accessible, for work, and even just to shop or visit family. In some border towns, seeing Canadian license plates is just as normal as American ones, blurring the sense of national lines in day-to-day living. When you add politics into the equation, things get even more interesting. North Dakota is known for its small government, low regulation, and pro-business attitudes, values that closely mirror those found in Alberta and other western provinces in Canada, more so than the broader federal direction coming out of Washington, D.C. This political alignment adds another layer to the question. If you're already living, working, and thinking in a way that mirrors your northern neighbor, why not formalize that relationship if the need or opportunity arises? And let's not forget that historically, this isn't just a fringe idea. There were once serious conversations about North Dakota and Manitoba merging into a shared economic zone. A proposal that didn't go through, but the fact that it was even considered reveals something deeper. The cultural and economic ties aren't new, they've just been quietly growing stronger over time. Now, this doesn't mean North Dakota will declare independence tomorrow. While this remains entirely hypothetical, it reflects how strong economic and cultural ties with Canada can lead to interesting discussions around regional identity, especially in times of national uncertainty. So this brings us to a question that reaches beyond borders. What does loyalty mean in the modern world? Is it about sticking with tradition, or is it about choosing what serves your community best, your well-being, your family's security, your future? In the words of the Buddha, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." And maybe, for some, peace comes from alignment, not with history, but with present reality. If you feel your own values, your lifestyle, or your economic future don't match the system you're part of, it's okay to ask big questions. That doesn't mean disloyalty, it means being awake to change. For North Dakota, the line between neighbor and partner has already blurred, and for us, whether we live there or just learn from it, the lesson is this: stay grounded in your reality. But don't be afraid to reimagine your future, because sometimes the path that brings stability and connection may lie just across a border, whether that's geographic or within your own beliefs. As we've seen, the idea of US states joining Canada may seem bold, even far-fetched, but beneath the surface there are deep currents of connection, culture, and shared values quietly pulling these regions closer together. Borders, after all, are not just lines on a map. They are living agreements, shaped by the people who live across them, and when those people begin to feel more aligned with a different vision of the future, questions naturally arise. So, what truly defines where we belong? Is it the land we stand on, the flag we salute, or the values we share and the peace we seek in our communities? If today's journey gave you something to reflect on, inspired a new perspective, or simply sparked your curiosity, we invite you to support the journey of wisdom. Please like, share, and subscribe, and don't forget to turn on notifications so you won't miss our upcoming videos, where we continue exploring the subtle truths of our changing world with open hearts and thoughtful minds. Until next time, take care, stay mindful, and may wisdom guide your path.